Hi, my name is Jamie Betters. I'm a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and certified diabetes educator. And here are some common questions I get about how to manage diabetes.
What is a carbohydrate?
Carbohydrates are the sugars, starches, and fibers that are found in food. Plant foods have lots of carbohydrates, and we find carbohydrates in naturally occurring sugars such as dairy products like milk and yogurt, and any added sugars that are put into foods. Our body takes carbohydrates and turns them into something called glucose, and glucose is the preferred source of energy for the cells in our body, especially our brain.
How many grams of carbohydrates can I have per meal? Also, could you explain servings versus meal?
So it's important to understand what a serving of carbohydrates is. So the way that we classify a serving of carbohydrates is an amount of a food that has about 15 grams of carbohydrate in it, give or take. And that is what we say is one serving of carbohydrates. How many servings of carbohydrates a person needs per meal is a little bit individually dependent upon how tall they are, how much they weigh, how much activity they get. But generally speaking, most women do well with about 3 to 4 servings of carbohydrate per meal, which is equal to 45 to 60 grams of carbohydrate. And most men do fine with about 3 to 5 servings of carbohydrate per meal, or about 45 to 75 grams of carbohydrate.
What happens if I do not eat enough carbs?
If you don't eat enough carbohydrates, your body won't have enough energy to function properly. Remember, our body takes carbohydrates and it turns it into glucose, and glucose is the preferred source of fuel for every cell. So you would find that you don't feel like you have enough energy. It can even disrupt your sleep cycles and make it harder for you to have a stable mood and attitude throughout the day. In addition, because carbohydrate-rich foods are our main source of dietary fiber, lots of antioxidants, phytochemicals, and other disease-preventive goodies, when you don't eat enough carbs, it's really not possible to get enough of those ingredients either, which overall can compromise our health in so many other ways.
Are certain carbs better than other carbs?
Absolutely. That's probably one of the biggest struggles that a lot of my patients have is they lump all carbohydrates under the same umbrella. So they consider a donut in the same category as a potato. And while they all are technically carbohydrate containing foods, carbohydrates that you can find in a garden that exist in nature are loaded with things that really do change not just how our body uses the carbohydrates that are in those foods, but because they provide our body with so many other beneficial nutrients, they have so many other health protective benefits as well. So carbohydrates that I encourage my patients to consume regularly is anything you can find in a garden or on a farm. So your whole grains, brown rice, wild rice, quinoa, oatmeal, starchy vegetables, potatoes, sweet potatoes, corn, plantains, legumes, beans, peas, lentils, and anything made from those foods, and of course fruits. These are foods that should be the main source of our carbohydrate intake throughout the day. And then, of course, reserving man-made edible carbohydrates, as I call them, more white flour-based carbs with added sugars and oils. Those should play more of an accenting role to our diet. They're not as high in fiber, often don't have any fiber. They're completely stripped of most of their vitamin mineral content, no antioxidants to speak of. And because they have the added sugars and oils, they really further feed into problems like inflammation. And while they provide calories, they don't provide nutrients, so patients can find themselves in a state where they're overfed but undernourished.
Can I still eat fruit?
Absolutely. Even though you have a condition like diabetes, fruit is something you absolutely should still include as part of your diet. Generally speaking, one serving of fruit as part of your main meals can be a great way to incorporate something sweet at the end of your meal. Plus, it gives you a nice boost of antioxidants and phytochemicals and vitamins and minerals. And the sugar that's in fruit is bound to fiber, so it isn't processed or digested exactly the same as sugar that we find in sodas and juices. And so I hate to see people cut fruit out of their diet because by doing that, you're eliminating a lot of nutrients that actually are very health protective.
What are some foods that you might think don't have carbs, but they really do?
Some easy places that carbs can get sort of snuck into foods would be things like sauces, sweet sauces on like a sweet and sour chicken, let's say, or a marinade. Salad dressings often have added sugars in them, or foods that people typically know are not carbohydrates like vegetables and proteins like meat. But if they have been breaded, it's not the deep frying process that adds carbs to them, though that's not particularly healthy for other reasons. It's the breading itself on the food that is made from flour, which is from a grain, and grains are carbohydrates. So now that food has carbs on it as well.
So, what's the difference between complex carbs and simple carbs?
The terminology simple carb and complex carb, generally speaking, is not always used that much anymore in nutrition counseling. And honestly, I personally find it confusing for a lot of my patients. I generally explain carbohydrates under two categories, whether they're naturally occurring and can be found in nature, or whether they're a processed food that's produced in a factory or a plant. The foods that we can get carbohydrates from that you can easily locate in a garden, for example, when we eat them in their whole intact state, they are digested more slowly, they're absorbed at a different rate, and they bring loads of fiber and vitamins and minerals and antioxidants with them. So those are the carbohydrates that we should be choosing the majority of the time. Using the processed carbohydrates, again, made from the white flour that often have added sugar and oils, really trying to marginalize the role that those play in our diet. And that way we can still enjoy abundant quantities of foods. Plant foods like carbohydrate-rich whole foods, they are loaded with water as well, so it's much harder to overeat on the foods when we eat them in their whole intact state as well.
What would you eat if you had diabetes?
My preferred meal plan for not just diabetes, but for really optimal health in every area and the improvement and potentially reversal of many chronic conditions would be a lower fat, whole food, plant-based meal plan. So that would include things like oatmeal for breakfast with some berries, for lunch, something with a whole grain and some kind of bean or lentil, lots of vegetables, a serving of fruit, similar pattern for dinner. This style of eating, because plant foods are so high in water and high in fiber, it's very easy to get full on this style of eating without overeating, which is really important. I think that helping people find a place of freedom and joy with food is really an important part of eating, because there's so much emotion attached to how we eat. We get to enjoy food with all five senses. So I truly believe that the things that we eat, we should thoroughly enjoy. And so I would personally opt for a whole food, plant-based style of eating.
What else would you like people to know about diabetes?
I think one of the common misconceptions around how to eat for diabetes that I'm always trying to clear up with my patients is, even though foods that are high-fat foods or just protein foods don't have carbohydrates, I don't want my patients to view those as freebie foods where they can eat as much as they want. And the reason behind that is, when there's too much fat in the diet, the excess fatty acids go into cells that are normally very sensitive at using blood sugar, and it makes them more resistant to using blood sugar. And so if somebody is eating too many cheese sticks, let's say, or they're freely using too much oil in their diet, salad dressings, high-fat meats, too much just protein in general, they can develop or worsen a condition called insulin resistance. And that's not an ideal situation for someone with diabetes, because insulin is a hormone their body makes. It frankly acts like a key to a door, and it opens the cells of the body, allowing glucose or blood sugar to get in and be utilized as energy. Well, when we are eating too much fat and protein all the time, those cells get full of fatty acids, and they don't want any more energy in the form of sugar. And so essentially the cells turn off their insulin receptors. And so we get a condition called insulin resistance. And the whole goal is not just to improve blood sugar. For my patients, I really want them to focus on improving health in so many other ways. And so I really want to help them eat as many carbohydrate-rich foods as they can, whole food-based carbohydrate-rich foods, because of all the other disease preventive qualities that those foods have. So I would say that's probably my number one passion for my patients is, don't think that just because it's not a carb, it's great for you and you can eat as much of it as you want. Be mindful of how much fat and protein you're eating.